Hey guys, Prowl 1701 here, and today we're going over the results of one of the It's Armageddon. Now we did an It's Armageddon that was basically a face-off where I gave you 25 classic Doctor Who head-to-heads. 25 stories where aliens are invading, and the only way we can keep them from decimating the planet is if we give up one of two choices of Doctor Who stories. They gave us 25 face-offs and said you can keep half, and the other half you have to give to us. So, I gave y'all these 25 face-offs, and I decided to see how y'all would vote. And we're going to talk about the results here. And I'll mention the ones I voted for as well. Now, the first one was the Daleks, the original Dalek story, versus the Dalek invasion of Earth. And I voted for the Dalek invasion of Earth, as I find the Daleks tends to plod a little at 7 parts. And I like the Dalek invasion of Earth at 4 parts. It has some great location work, filming around the city. Plus, Susan's goodbye is really well done. And so I voted for that. And that was the one that won, actually. Not by much. It was like 12 to 10, I think. It was close, but Dalek invasion did win. The next one was Day of the Daleks versus Planet of the Daleks. I, of course, voted for Day of the Daleks because I love the special edition of Day of the Daleks. Whereas Planet of the Daleks is my least favorite 70s Dalek story. I just don't get into it. It's perfectly watchable. And I much prefer the original version of it over the special effects. And that's the only story I can say that about with the updated effects. And it actually had about double the score, actually. Day of the Daleks did win that vote, and it had twice the score of Planet of the Daleks. Next up was Power of the Daleks versus Evil of the Daleks, and my vote literally broke the tie on that. I voted for Power of the Daleks. I love Power of the Daleks. I love Evil of the Daleks. Evil does have slightly better animation. Well, slightly better. Evil has better animation, but Power to me is the better story. They're both good. And I love that Evil has a surviving episode, because that surviving episode is phenomenal. But I do prefer Power. They're great stories. They're both David Whittaker stories. David Whittaker knows his Daleks. The Dalek voices are phenomenal in it. But I did slightly prefer Power, and it was a close vote. Like, literally, my vote broke the tie. It was a tie up until that point. So Power barely wins that one. The next one was Tomb of the Cybermen versus The Invasion. I voted for The Invasion. I like Tomb of the Cybermen, but as I mentioned in my recent review, I do think it's a little overrated, whereas I think The Invasion is phenomenal. And the only reason I think it's not often placed higher is because it has a couple missing episodes. And the animation for which is fine for those. I love The Invasion. Some iconic imagery there. One of the best human villains Doctor Who has ever had in Vaughn. And again, the Doctor and the TARDIS team were just really good in that story. I absolutely love The Invasion. That's what I voted for. It's also the one that won. Score of 12 to 9, I believe. That is the one that won between it and Tomb. The next one was Web of Fear versus Enemy of the World. I voted for Web of Fear. I find both stories a little overrated, as I tend to find Series 5 in general overrated. It's my least favorite Troughton story. But I did vote Web of Fear. I do prefer Web of Fear, even with the missing episode, over Enemy of the World, though they're both good. Now, the other one actually won, though. Enemy of the World did win this one. 12 to 9 with my vote, because I voted for Web. But Enemy of the World did win that one. It actually took the trophy on between those two, so we would lose Web and keep Enemy. Next on the list was Ice Warriors versus the Seeds of Death. And Seeds of Death just slaughtered it. I mean, it was bad. We're talking 3 times the votes here. I voted for Seeds of Death, as I find Ice Warriors tends to plod a little. It's not a bad story, it just gets a little boring to me. Needed to be 4 parts. The animation for episodes 2 and 3 is fine. I enjoy it, but it really should have just been a 4-parter, whereas Seeds of Death fills out its runtime a lot better, I think. And I just enjoy the story better. And most of you agreed, because it won like 3 to 1. The next one was An Unearthly Child versus The Time Meddler. And with my vote, that was a tie. 10 apiece. 10 votes apiece. And that was a really tricky one, because I was curious whether the first episode of An Unearthly Child would bolster it up, because the other 3 episodes people are just kind of on, whereas everybody loves all of Time Meddler. But that first episode of Unearthly Child is so significant, I wondered how it would affect voting. It's one of the reasons why I put those head-to-heads, is Time Meddler as a whole has such a good reputation. It was a tie. With my vote, that made it a tie. The Aztecs versus Reign of Terror. I voted for Reign of Terror. I love Reign of Terror. I like the Aztecs, but it is one of my least favorite Hartnell stories. Although it has some beautiful set designs, and I absolutely love Barbara in the story, and some of the humorous stuff that happens with the first Doctor in the story. But I love Reign of Terror. Like, I just love Reign of Terror. It's one of my favorite historicals, and I absolutely love the cliffhanger to episode 1 with the burning house. That's really well pulled off for its time. But I have to say the Aztecs slaughtered it in the votings. We're talking 3-1 voting. The Aztecs beat it 3-1. Even though I voted for Reign of Terror, most of you guys preferred the Aztecs, and the Aztecs won 3-1 in the votes. A massive, massive landslide victory for the Aztecs. The next one was Spearhead from Space versus Inferno. And Inferno was the one I voted for. Most of you guys know I love Inferno. It's one of the 2 stories I have earliest memories of watching. Despite, I have the original DVD release, not the special edition. The special edition's on my wish list. Please check that out. But the original version hasn't quite had the restoration work done that the special edition has. And the original version is more what I'm used to seeing. Although I'm sure the actual TV broadcast copy I saw in the 80s was much worse than the DVD restoration. But for me, that's just what that's what old TV looked like when I was a kid. Oh, we're watching something from the 60s or 70s. That's what old shows look like. So even though Spearhead from Space does look a lot better with it being on film and being preserved and in HD now, I love the story for Inferno. It's not often I think Doctor Who can make a 6 or 7-parter that fills out its runtime as perfectly as Inferno does. It feels expertly paced. So I've heard people tell me you can trim an episode off. No, I feel like Inferno is perfectly paced at 7 parts. If somebody was ever to ask me a perfect Doctor Who story, that would probably be the first one that popped in my head. I love Inferno. I'm not saying it's my favorite, but I can't really find a lot of faults with it. The Primords or whatever they're called, their teeth look really fake. That's about it. I love Inferno. And it did win the vote 2-1, actually. Including my vote, it won the vote 2-1. Spearhead got its share of votes, but Inferno won it 2-1. Next on the list was Mind of Evil versus the Daemons. Now, most of you who know me, you know I'm going to vote Mind of Evil, because Mind of Evil is my favorite story from Season 8. Even though I've only watched it once, I do need to rewatch that. But I love Mind of Evil. I think it's a really good story. And I love how it touches on stuff from Inferno still staying with the Doctor. He hasn't quite gotten over the events of Inferno yet. I love that kind of carryover. And whereas the Daemons, most of you guys know, I don't care for that. I find that the most overrated Pertwee story. And again, to be fair, I'm an American, so I don't quite have the connection that a British person might to that kind of setting and story with all the Celtic lore and all that, and I definitely think that could be a contributing factor. However, that being said, the Daemons did win this vote, whereas Mind of Evil had, including mine, 9 votes, the Daemons had 11, so the Daemons did squeak out a little bit and win that matchup. So we would have to give up Mind of Evil to the aliens, and we would keep the Daemons for everybody to watch. This is disappointment. The next one was the 3 Doctors versus the 5 Doctors. And my God, if there was any of these matchups that went in a way I didn't expect, it was this one. Because the 5 Doctors slaughtered it. 2-1, including my vote. I voted for the 3 Doctors. I love the 3 Doctors. It's my favorite multi-Doctor story. Don't get me wrong, I love the 5 Doctors as well. Richard Herndl, I love him as the first Doctor. And of course, everybody is great in this. I love the 5 Doctors. But I love the 3 Doctors. Easily my favorite multi-Doctor story, period. And I was surprised that 5 Doctors beat it 2-1 in votes. 2-1. That astounded me. Next one was Carnival of Monsters versus the Green Death. And the Green Death did win. I voted for the Green Death. Let me be clear, I love Carnival of Monsters. Carnival of Monsters is the hidden gem of the Pertwee era. I think it's the story that modern Who fans, if they're only catching the cliff notes of classic Who, it's the one they're going to miss without realizing it. Because they're going to watch the big names that they hear people talk about. You know, they're going to watch Genesis, they're going to probably watch Inferno, maybe Spearhead, but they might miss Carnival of Monsters because it's just as good, but it doesn't come up in conversation as much. I love Carnival of Monsters. Great story. But The Green Death is iconic for a reason. It is brought up in conversation for a reason. It is a phenomenal story. One of the best companion departures. The effects for the maggots are really well done. Most of the effects are good. The CSO is rough in a couple places, and the little flying thing looks atrociously terrible. But the rest of the story is really good. It's a great send-off for Joe. So I voted for The Green Death, and so did most of you. Next up is Genesis of the Daleks versus Robots of Death. This is probably the most one-sided vote. Genesis slaughtered it. Robots of Death got like 3 votes. Everyone else, including myself, was Genesis. I mean, it's Genesis. You have to have Genesis. I went with those two because I wondered if Robots of Death might eke out some more because it is a famous, well-known episode. But nope, Genesis' reputation and legacy carried it through. Rightfully so. Genesis is amazing. I feel like it lives up to all of the accolades it gets. I've heard a couple people say they think it's a little too long. I disagree, although there is the omnibus version of it that exists if you prefer to watch that. I think its 6 parts are phenomenal, and I love it. Next up was Seeds of Doom versus the Talons of Wing Chiang. I think most of us will agree both of these are phenomenal stories, masterpiece stories, and 2 of the best Doctor Who stories ever made. That being said, Talons did beat it 3-1, including my vote. It was a hard choice. This is one of the hardest ones on the list I had to do. I did end up going with Talons, but I was flip-flopping back and forth for a while. They're just both so good. And Talons did beat it 3-1 in the votes. Next on the list is Pyramids of Mars versus City of Death. And City of Death won, although Pyramids of Mars did make a pretty respectable showing. It got about 2/3 of the votes that City did. So City only got about 1/3 more. City got my vote, of course, because City of Death is my favorite Doctor Who story. I absolutely love it. That location filming is just fantastic, especially for classic Who. Phenomenally good. Having Julian Glover there is great. I love the writing. I love the humor. I love City of Death. That being said, I love Pyramids of Mars. If there's one Doctor Who story I haven't seen in over a decade that I'm chomping at the bit to see again, it's Pyramids of Mars. It's the only season 13 story I don't own. And I don't even think it's on my Amazon wish list because I think it's super expensive. I think the Region 1 version of it, which is what I would have to have for DVD, I think it's very expensive now. But I want to see it again. I'm really looking forward to that season 13 collection box set getting announced and coming out so I can watch Pyramids of Mars again because I have the rest of season 13 on DVD. I just don't have that one. But I love that. Sutekh is one of the best villains in all of Doctor Who. Probably the best one-time villain in all of Doctor Who, and they never need to bring him back, so I'm worried they've ruined it. Especially these days. Next up is the Ark in Space versus the Horror of Fang Rock. And I think with my vote, it was a tie. If I'm doing this right, yes, it looks like... yes, with my vote, it ended up being a tie. Understandably, the Ark in Space and Horror of Fang Rock are both phenomenal stories. The Ark in Space being a masterpiece and Horror of Fang Rock being a masterpiece that is also the best of its season. Both are horror stories, or both stories that do their horror elements very well. And I voted for Ark in Space, but if you'll notice right then, I had to glance down and look to check. I wasn't sure. Because it would depend on the day, which one I'd vote for. I love both stories. I would probably lean more toward Ark in Space because I do have a childhood attachment to it. It's the other of the 2 stories that I have earliest memories of watching. Inferno and Ark in Space are the 2 Doctor Who stories I remember watching the earliest. I'm not saying they're the first ones I saw. They're the ones I have earliest memory of, are those 2 stories. So I probably went with it just as the tie-breaking factor. But there are times I would much rather watch Horror of Fang Rock. It's which one I'm in the mood for. They're both phenomenal stories with fantastic horror elements. Next one on the list is Castrovalva versus Kenda. Castrovalva did win that one. Kenda made a great showing, but Castrovalva won 12-9. So Kenda still managed to get about 3/4 the number of votes Castrovalva did. Now, I don't like Kenda. I think it's the most overrated Davison episode, period. I don't care for it. But I love Castrovalva. That's my favorite Davison episode. I'm not saying it's his best performance, but it's my favorite episode from his era. I love Castrovalva, especially with the updated effects on the box set. Those really, really give it that little bit extra it needed. The next one on this one is Resurrection of the Daleks versus the Caves of Androzani, and Caves slaughtered it 3-1. I voted for Caves as well, but I love Resurrection of the Daleks. It's a good story. It really needs some updated effects. It needs to be the story in Season 21 that gets the updated effects. Especially like the human resistance with their little sounding guns that it's just a little light that comes on at the end. They don't shoot anything. And there's a lot of scenes in Resurrection where there's combat going on, and not having effects for those is very frustrating. So it really needs updated effects with laser beams or laser blast or something shooting out. Some people on YouTube have done some marvelous works with those scenes. Doctor Who needs to take note when they do the Season 21 collection set. But Caves is Caves. I don't have to tell you why Caves is great. Slightly overrated perhaps, but Caves is a phenomenal. It is Davison's masterpiece and his best performance. And it deserves the 3-1 win that it got. For the Doomsday versus Black Orchid. For the Doomsday got my vote and just barely squeaked it out. It was a 10-8. So almost a tie. For the Doomsday barely beat it. I actually really like For the Doomsday. Not just I like For the Doomsday. I really enjoy For the Doomsday. Even though it's completely studio bound. I love the story. I love the acting. It's nice seeing Davison get to use his sonic some since he doesn't have it very long. I enjoy seeing that. I love For the Doomsday. Black Orchid, I don't really care for. I don't hate Black Orchid, but it's just one of those I want to watch every blue moon. The location work looks phenomenal. Since it is surviving film in true HD, the location work looks beautiful. I love watching him play cricket at the beginning. The story itself I just find very boring. Thank goodness it's only 2 parts. I do need to hear the audio commentary for that one, though. I hear it's phenomenal. Next is Two Doctors versus Revelation of the Daleks. And Revelation won that one. Not quite 2-1, but close to 2-1. Two Doctors did get a few votes, but Revelations did beat it out. I voted for Two Doctors myself, though, because it has Troughton, because it has Fraser Hines, and because it has that badass Suntaran theme that I absolutely love. I voted for Two Doctors. As much as I like Revelations, I do like Revelations, but I prefer Two Doctors, even though Revelations has a better story, but Two Doctors has Troughton and the Suntaran theme. But Revelations did win almost 2-1. Next up was Mysterious Planet versus Terror of the Vervoids. I voted for Mysterious Planet. These are the 2 stories I like the most from Season 23. But Mysterious Planet is easily my favorite. I like Vervoids, despite that unfortunate mask design of the Vervoids that once you see, you can't unsee. But Mysterious Planet, I just like better. I like Glitz. I'm a huge fan of Glitz as a character. Even though he does some pretty terrible things, Tony plays him in such a way he just comes across as that lovable rogue type. And the incidental music. I love the incidental music from Mysterious Planet. And Mysterious Planet did win the vote, only by a couple of votes, but Mysterious Planet did win between those. Remembrance of the Daleks versus Curse of Fenrik, and literally my vote was the tiebreaker. Remembrance had 10, Fenrik had 10. I picked Fenrik, and that was the tiebreaker. I like both of those stories. I think both of them are a bit overrated. But Remembrance does have a few things that irk me, that really irk me. The things about Remembrance that irk me tend to really irk me, whereas Curse of Fenrik only has a couple things that irk me, and they only slightly irk me. And I just love Curse of Fenrik. To me, that is the definitive Sylvester McCoy story. So if I was recommending a Sylvester McCoy story for somebody to watch, that is the one I would pick over Remembrance. Although I know a lot of people would pick Remembrance. Next on the list is Paradise Towers versus Happiness Patrol. And Happiness Patrol did win by a couple votes. I voted Paradise Towers, but I really went back and forth on it. And to be honest, it's another one of those I had to glance down to see which one I voted for. Because to me, the stories tend to remind me of each other a lot. I've had a lot of people, before I saw Happiness Patrol, a lot of people told me, well, if you like Paradise Towers, you'll like Happiness Patrol. If you don't like Paradise Towers, you won't like Happiness Patrol. I know Nikayako told me that several times, and he's right. I can definitely see that. I think I slightly prefer Paradise Towers, but I do need to give it a rewatch, preferably with the original music. Both stories are good though. And then next we have Greatest Show in the Galaxy versus Survival, and Survival slaughtered it, much to my delight. Survival probably won more for being the last episode than for the episode itself, I suspect. Survival is a good final episode for the story. I love how it touches on Ace and her backstory, kind of a template for what we would get with Rose in the modern show, showing more of the companion's life. And then I love that final speech at the end of Survival, too. It's a great send-off to Classic Who. I kind of figured Greatest Show might do better just because it does tend to have a good reputation, even though I don't care for it. It is the most overrated McCoy story for me, and my least favorite McCoy story besides maybe Delta and the Bannerman. I don't know. They're both... I forget where I ranked them. Those are probably my bottom two, Greatest Show and Delta and the Bannerman. I don't care for either of them that much. So I was happy to see Survival beat it over 3-1. And then the final one was 10th Planet versus the Moonbase, and 10th Planet slaughtered it. I picked the Moonbase, just one, because I prefer Troughton over Hartnell. Two, I prefer the story of the Moonbase over the story of the 10th Planet, even if Moonbase is kind of a rehash of 10th Planet. I like the first half of the 10th Planet. It's really good, but episode 3, it's very obvious Hartnell's not there, since Hartnell was sick at the time. In episode 4, while the animation is good, the camera work for the animation feels off. It doesn't feel like it fits the live-action episodes at all. It was very jarring when I watched it for the first time. Very jarring. And then not having the iconic moments of episode 4 in live-action are off-putting. Whereas in Moonbase, I don't find it hard transitioning between the animation and the live action. And I do love the animation. Moonbase has my favorite animation to date, with Macroterra being a really close second. So, that's where we land. 10th Planet won that one. So, that is how they all worked out. I would like to know what you thought of this list. I have done a video talking about the modern series as well, but I don't think that goes up. That's actually probably up by the time y'all see this. I needed a little bit of a breather between classic and modern, so I could tally all these up. The comment section for when y'all were writing these was very amusing too, because a lot of y'all would list why y'all voted the way you did. A lot of those were quite amusing, I will say, informative and amusing. So I would like to know what you think of this list, and if you didn't get to vote in it, comment down below and tell me the ones you would have voted for in that matchup. Other things to do, click the like button and the subscribe button and the bell for notifications so you never miss out on another video. I also have a Patreon. If you like what I do and would like to contribute to what I do, there is a link to that down in the description below. Anyone who joins at any tier level gets a free video request. I also have a P.O. box if there's anything you would like to send me, and a link to my Amazon wish list in case there's anything on that you would like to send me. I update it regularly. I want to give a shout out to two of my top tier patrons, Stephen Crane and the Fifth Doctor. I appreciate their support, just as I do the support of all of my patrons. Most importantly, though, thank you for watching.